Ladies and gentlemen, Worlds is upon us. Worlds is upon us. And that means it is time, as usual, to start talking about which champions are going to be played in the meta at Worlds. Perhaps they won't be played in the meta at Worlds, as with a couple of years ago, where there were some champions that were very, very strong that weren't picked, and then they did finally get picked, and then they were, very strong, to say the least. But today we're going to be making tier lists, one for each role. Now, the app that I'm using to do this is called ProComps, and ProComps have asked me to give some completely honest critique of their application. So that is what I will be doing over the next few days, using this application around Worlds and how it works. One of the things that I need to do in this application is make tier lists for every roles, so it lines up perfectly with what I wanted to do anyway. The application is called ProComps. You can see it here on my desktop, as well as, I don't think it actually says anywhere here, maybe if I click here. ProComps, there we go. But yes, I need to make my own custom tier list. Okay, we will begin in the most important role in the game, the best role in the game, the role that all the best players play. We'll begin in the top lane. So, what we're going to do, we're going to scroll through this list, we're going to find all the champions that could be played in top lane, and we're going to talk about where they place in the tier list. Now, one final thing to mention before I start is that I already made a top lane tier list last patch, however that is now outdated. I was going to make tier lists for every role last patch, but top lane, the patch came faster than I expected. So now we are solidly on 14-18. The patch has been out for a few days. People have been playing on it. People have been figuring out what's good. So let's get started. Aatrox. Let me define my tiers before I start putting champions in tiers. B is going to be like really average. Okay. A is going to be above average. S is like this champ should be pick or ban every single game. Like it's broken. C is below average. And D is like terrible. Okay. So very sort of, you've got a middle. You've got above the middle, below the middle. Insane, terrible. Okay, Aatrox is just above average. Okay, he's an A tier champion. He has two builds that he can play in different game states. You've got lethality. Normally when he needs to go in, you're looking for lethality. And then you've got bruiser. Normally when the enemy needs to go into him, you're looking at bruiser. Both are okay. Lethality, I think, is still better than bruiser. Bruiser Aatrox is still a little bit undertuned, but the main thing is his blind pick ability is very high, which is something that you really want from a top laner at the moment. He has no flex into other roles. This is something that will be considered throughout the course of making these tier lists. But yeah, individually, he's kind of like an A tier. He's an above average champion, and he's got nice blind pick ability. Okay, Akali. Akali top is like okay, it's playable. It's a flex pick into mid, which gives her a little bit of, a little bit extra. But the main reason Akali is picked is like a fringe counter pick into specifically Gwen. I think she also has a good matchup into Fiora, but that's not a champion we see at the moment. So yeah, she's kind of like a counter pick that can occasionally be flexed out of mid into top, but I don't think that's going to happen very often. And her individual power level is very low. You would never just blind pick Akali. I'm going to put her in C tier. I think she's below average, but I don't think she's like awful or anything. Okay, Akshan. I think Akshan is hurt by some indirect changes that have happened over the patches. Kraken Slayer has been nerfed for him. Fleet Footwork has now been nerfed. That affects some of his matchups where he's not looking to go PTA. He's also a very solo QE champion, where he relies quite a lot on cheeses and roams and stuff like that to get a lead, because if he doesn't get a lead, he ends up not being the best. I'm also going to put Akshan in C. I think there's much better range tops you can pick if you do want a range top, and even much better marksman tops you can pick if you specifically want a marksman top. Now, again, he does have some flexibility into mid lane, but I just don't think the champ is in the best spot. Let's see, who else is a top lane champ? Aurora. Aurora's still A tier, even after the minor nerfs that came in on patch 14-18 that we're currently on. I still think Aurora sits nicely in A tier. Yeah, this champion's really powerful. Still being discovered, like a lot of her strengths as well. She's still fairly new. People are still building proficiency on her. But what she can bring to a team fight is crazy, and her dominance in a lot of lane matchups that she can be picked in is also crazy, being the ranged top. I do think she's, despite the win rate differential in solo queue, which is odd to me, I do think she's better in top than she is in mid. But again, flexibility into mid. She is A tier. I think, honestly, I might have underrated her in the 14-17 one, and she could have been like fringe S tier in there, but I do think she's A currently. She did just get tapped down a bit. Okay, Azir. I think I had Azir in B on the previous patch. Now, he was pretty strong individually, had some really nice counter matchups in top lane, really good in pretty much any comp, and had flexibility into mid lane. Unfortunately, the 14-18 patch absolutely decimated Azir. He has no damage anymore, especially in lane phase, and a big reason you would play Azir in the top lane was to bully champions like Gnar, or Gangplank, or melee tops that can't interact with him, right? You can't do that anymore. He just doesn't have the damage, so now he's in D. Like, genuinely, Azir top is in D. I would never play Azir top anymore. It got completely murdered by the patch. I've never seen nerfs, like, as massive as that. But I think they just really didn't want Azir to dominate the meta at Worlds, so they were just like, we will completely over-nerf him, and we'll fix him later. So that's their idea. Briar. This champion is very much like Katarina, if you understand how Katarina is in mid lane. She has to cheese kills, and she has to get like cheesy roams off that just rely on the enemy team, like the enemy team not respecting your roam, not respecting the pings of the enemy laner. She doesn't actually win lane in any matchups, really, kind of like Katarina in mid lane. She's playing off of like the low coordination, sort of chaotic environment of solo queue. That is what Briar thrives in, people making mistakes and her punishing them. In competitive, she's just not very good. She also doesn't have very high like mastery, so all the other champions are being pushed to a higher degree of skill than Briar is. I mean, the champion literally plays itself, right? There's not too much you can do with that. So yeah, Briar's not a good champion in competitive. I would just not pick this champ. Okay, Camille. Camille is a really nice counter pick in the meta. I think she's A tier. I think she's above average. She's not S tier or anything. She's not blindable. But especially with players like Bin, who are extremely proficient at this champ, she can be very good in a lot of drafts. She helps a lot of engaged drafts function. She helps lock down a lot of AD carries that engaged drafts can't normally play into, like Ezreal. She has really nice matchups. She's a good counter pick to Aatrox. Some other champs that we'll see she ends up being a good counter pick to. I do think Camille is pretty good in the current meta. Okay, Cassiopeia top lane. This champ is really underrated, like criminally underrated. She's flex top and mid. A lot of the things that people are playing, she completely hard counters. A lot of the lanes that people are blinding, she completely murders. I do think she's A tier. I think her little change that she got a few patches ago that slightly lowered her damage but gave her way more mana to play with is a big improvement to top lane Cassiopeia as well, because part of the issue she used to have was sometimes against very tanky champions in the early game she could run out of mana before she could kill them. That no longer happens. She can really bully a lot of the champion pool in top lane, and of course she is also a flex, which I when making these tier lists absolutely consider flexibility into other roles as a strong suit of the champion. So yes, I do think Cassiopeia is a nice A tier pick. Okay, what do we got next? Cho'Gath. Cho'Gath goes in C. He's below average. The difficulty with Cho'Gath at the moment, there is that Triforce build, which as a stat stick makes him quite strong. The problem he has is that his Q is a big part of his kit, and it relies on hitting it, and there is so much movement speed creep in the game. Cosmic Drive is in the game. Swiftness boots are in the game. And people are building Swiftness boots more than usual because the other boots have been nerfed. There's also Phantom Dancer giving 12% move speed. Kraken Slayer and Shiv have move speed on them. People are building those. Jhin is in the meta. This guy can never be hit with Q. Force of Nature is really good. Deadman's Plate is really good. There's just a lot of move speed in the game, and it's very hard for Cho'Gath to play into that. He gets kited, and he can't land his Q. It's just not a great environment for him. I expect him to be a lot better next season or next split when they're making a conscious effort to knock down the move speed creep that's been put into the game. Corki, I think, on this patch is probably D tier. Maybe he could be fringe C tier as a flex, but I think he's just D. The reason I'm putting him on is we have seen Corki top as an answer. Basically, it was an answer to get your Corki out of mid lane to get a better mid lane matchup. So we've seen it when the enemy picks Kennen, you can move your Corki into top lane and play Corki versus Kennen, and then you can play something else in mid lane to counterpick your mid. I can't remember exactly how else this was done, but like I think they had Corki versus Nasus in mid lane, and they didn't want that, so I think it was Gen G maybe moved Corki into top lane and played something else, and played Garen mid into the Nasus. I think that's what happened. So yeah, Corki has like this minor flexibility into top lane, but the problem is on this patch he lost 20 damage on his Q, and he also lost a sizable amount of let me get the patch notes up actually so that I can show it on stream. Every time I'm talking about it. So let's scroll down to Corki. He lost 20 damage on Q, and he also lost 40 damage on R and 10% bonus AD on R. So this champ lost so much damage. Very, very weak now compared to what he was before. Very big nerfs. So yeah, I wouldn't put this champion into top lane anymore. I think stat-wise, he's just too weak now. Okay, Darius. Darius is really interesting to me. Darius is a champion that is underutilized, I think, but goes in A tier. So this is a champ that if you can play him well, not a lot of top laners put a lot of time into him. I think there's like Adam and Keen, whoever really pick him. Broken Blade picks him sometimes as well, and Whippo. I think these are the four guys that actually pick Darius. I don't think there's many other Darius players in the world at the minute. But the thing with Darius is that if the enemy's playing an engage comp, he's an absolute demon. Like, if you have to run into Darius, he's a monster. The other thing is that the item situation is really good for him at the minute, and he's just very individually strong. And then the final thing is that his jungle clear is extremely fast, so he's also a flex pick into jungle. Darius with like Stride Breaker, he has Sterak's Gauge is really strong, he has Deadman's Plate, Force of Nature. These items allow him to be extremely fast, way faster than you'd expect on Darius. And yeah, he just murders a lot of top lane matchups, especially a lot of things that are being blinded. And any draft where the enemy needs to run into you, Darius is a demon. Any draft where the enemy doesn't have a lot of mobility, Darius is great. So yeah, I do like Darius quite a lot. Okay, Dr. Mundo. This champ goes in C tier. Broken Blade has been making it work by being better than the other top laners in EU. If he tried to pick this champion in some of the spots that he is picking it into any of the Eastern top laners, he would get absolutely murdered and would not be able to play the game. So, the issue with Dr. Mundo is his laning phase. Now, once he's scaled, he's a great champion. If the enemy doesn't have % health damage, he's a great champion. If the enemy's fairly immobile, he's a great champion. Okay. Now let's talk about the downsides. This champion cannot lane. Okay, all of these champions that are in A tier right now they just absolutely shit on Mundo to the point that they can create a lead, take second wind and Doran shield, and use the gold they get from their lead on sustain. So like no magic mantle they could get, or they could buy if they buy towards sustain anyway. They can. None of these are actually going to buy lifesteal, right? But you take second wind, Doran shield, you crash third wave, you get a null magic mantle, and from then every time this guy, people say, oh, you can just farm with Q. No, you can't. Just tank the Q. You have second wind, you have Doran shield, you have a null magic mantle. You literally don't care if his Q hits you. I wouldn't tank it for the caster creeps. Just let him have the caster creeps. They're way less gold. and XP. But push him away from XP whenever you can. Tank the cleavers. Never let him get a cannon minion. If he tries to get a cannon minion, he just dies. His lane phase is so weak, and the only reason he's being played is that, one, I don't think people are understanding that they can just block the cleaver and tank it to not let him CS, and two, the level of top laners in the region where he's being played is very low. I do think that EU has the worst top laners in the world. There is Broken Blade, and then after that there's a giant gap. Merwin is kind of doing some stuff by having funky champion pools, but he's not actually that great. Whereas even in NA, you've got like Impact, who I think is the best Western top laner. You've got Bwipo, and you've got Sniper, who is like Sniper's like a little demon, man. His lane phase is so good. It's when he's out of lane phase that's the problem. So even in NA, I don't think Mundo would work. It's just like an EU thing. Okay, a little bit of a rant on Mundo there, but carrying on. Fiddlesticks. Fiddlesticks, I will put in C tier. This champion is very fringe. I think D is like don't pick, and C is like fringe. Like maybe you could pick is kind of the line I'm taking, or just like slightly undertuned, but you could pick it. Fiddlesticks is a really, really good Rumble counter. Like really good Rumble counter. Rumble can't play the lane into Fiddlesticks. Everything Rumble wants to do is completely negated by Fiddlesticks. Fiddlesticks can all-in him, he can out-sustain him, he can make his Q do no damage by fearing him and turning his model around. I think we saw Merwin play it. If we didn't, Merwin does play it. It's a very good Rumble counter. And also it has that flexibility into jungle, where I do think he's a very strong jungler. So yeah, C tier for Fiddlesticks. That's the spot where I would pick him. Other than that, I probably wouldn't pick him. There might be one or two other matchups that I haven't considered that he might be good in, but it is pretty much just the Rumble matchup. Let's see. F. Okay, we're on F. Fiora. Oh, Fiora. This champ is so strong in solo queue, but in competitive, she's just too difficult to pull off. Like, playing through side lane in competitive just doesn't work the way it used to. You'll just lose the game elsewhere. She really wants to be played around as well, which is not really what you want from a top laner at the moment. She's also kind of hit by the move speed creep thing that I was talking about. It's really hard for Fiora to ever interact with a Phantom Dancer Zeri, or, do you know what I mean, like an Ezreal. It's very hard for her to play the game into those. She's very much just sit in the side lane. Maybe if they have like a really tanky draft where it's all tanks, she could be picked, but again, I then think she's just doing like she's being like a worse version of Gwen, which we'll get to later, or even Darius in that spot. But yeah, Fiora's like okay. Maybe someone who's very, very proficient at the champion could pick it. I don't think there are actually any incredible Fiora play. Like Bin is probably the best Fiora, but even Bin probably wouldn't pick Fiora at the minute. Her lane phase is nowhere near as good as it used to be as well. It's more just like neutrally. She's building Ravenous Hydra. Divine Sunderer, she had so much more threat in lane when she was buying that. But that's gone, so she's not doing that anymore. Okay. Galio. Galio, I think, can be played full tank in top. He can be flexed out of mid, which, again, the flex gives him some extra power that we do like to consider. We've not actually got anyone in B tier yet. That's interesting. But yeah, Galio, I think he's probably C as well. In the right draft, he could be pretty good. His matchups aren't the greatest across the board. He's kind of like what Corki was last time. Sometimes you might put your Galio into top to get a better matchup in mid. Or if it's like very much the right draft, then maybe Galio could come in, kind of like Fiddlesticks. Yeah, I think he's just okay. Alright. Where are we? Gangplank. This is my first B tier. Gangplank isn't strong enough individually. He does have some nice counter matchups, but he is very average. He's great to have in the game for the rest of your champs. His ult is lovely, but a lot of the time at the minute he's actually needing to use his ult for his lane to like fix waves and stuff into a lot of matchups. There is the Renekton matchup, which is like historically great for him. So that is a spot where you could pick GP, but he's just kind of undertuned compared to how he used to be. So before the crit item rework, where he lost Navori, and also the crit version of Essence Reaver, I thought he was an A tier champion. Before he lost Prowler's Claw with the dash, I thought he was an S tier champion. Maybe even with Eon Navori, he was still an S tier champion, honestly. But now with this Trinity Force Opportunity version that's being played, yeah, I think he's B tier overall. There is a very nice niche for Gangplank as well into teams that are playing very heavily around enchanters with a lot of shields. He can go Serpent's Fang, and that applies on his ult. So if you're playing like a teamfight comp into that sort of draft, GP is a really nice option for you. But yeah, on an individual power basis, he's just not high enough to go higher in the tier list for me. Garen. I think Garen is honestly like kind of overtuned for solo queue, but it doesn't translate too well into competitive. I'll probably put him B tier. He's a flex into mid as well. Sometimes he's played mid. He's used as a Nasus counter. He doesn't really counter Nasus as hard as people think he does. It is winning for Garen, but it's not like the best lane or anything. Like you could potentially even be playing Olaf mid into a lot of these Nasus drafts, and it would be even harder. But yeah, Garen B tier. Kind of overtuned champion that has sort of the Briar effect where she doesn't really work that well in competitive. In some drafts, though, I acknowledge that Garen can be extremely good. Kind of like Gangplank, right? Sometimes he can be extremely good, sometimes he can be kind of useless. Overall, he ends up somewhere in B tier. Right, Fizz is not being played. Gnar. Gnar just got a nice buff. I thought he was A tier before, but I thought he was like bottom of A. Now I think he's probably more towards top of A. He just got a nice base AD buff. I think it was 3 base AD, maybe 4. Yeah, 3. From 57 up to 60. Now, Gnar builds Trinity Force, so this is bigger than just 3 damage per auto. This is 3 damage per auto and 6 damage per Triforce proc that he's actually gaining. So that's really nice for Gnar. But yeah, Gnar, solid A tier champion, can be picked as a counter pick to a lot of things that are being seen. Renekton comes in, Gnar's a great counter pick. Darius comes in, Gnar's great. You know, any of these champions that can be kited out. And there's also going to be a lot more room for Gnar, I think, with Jarvan being bumped up in the meta because Narvan is a very nice combo. No flex on Gnar, he's just a solid A tier top laner. Gragas, A tier. For sure A tier. So much flex. He can be played in jungle, which he's not the best at, but he can. He can be played in mid, which he's not the best at, but he can. And he has some fringe support counters too, into like Rakan, into Alistar. There's a lot of champions. There's a few champions, I guess, in support, where like into Rel as well, where you can pick Gragas and completely deny. He also sets up Yasuo, who's in a really good spot. And his individual power in top lane's his best role for sure. His individual power is quite high. I do think Gragas is very strong. One of the best disengaged champs in the game as well, but very flexible in terms of what drafts he can be played in. Okay, Gwen. Gwen is... If I was just rating Gwen on top lane, I would put her in B. She's nowhere near as strong as she has been in the past. Now, if the whole enemy team needs to run into her and there's key spells that can be dodged with a W, then obviously she's a lot stronger. However, Gwen jungle is also very good, so I think she moves up to A for me, based on that. Fiddle is S tier when played by Merwin. I mean, I would still, even if I was Merwin, I would still only play it into Rumble. Unless he has like some other matchup that he thinks is very good, but my understanding is that it's a Rumble counter pick, in which case, like, sure, go for it. But yeah, anyway, Gwen jungle flex is moving her from B to A. Heimerdinger, I'll put him in C because like sometimes there's a draft where the entire enemy team needs to run into you and they're playing a top laner that relies on getting ahead, and Heimerdinger can just completely neutralize it, and then you have to run into Heimerdinger. That could be really hard. He could also like kind of flex into support. I don't think mid Heimerdinger is ever a thing anymore. I think he is just top and support. But yeah, he can go there. Oh, Graves. I don't know if I even rated Graves last time. Did they end up... I'm sure they were debating buffing Graves, right? But they didn't buff Graves. Or did they buff Graves a while ago? I'm not sure. I will put Graves in C. I think you can potentially, like, there's some matchups that are really good for him, and kind of like the old Corki thing or the Galio thing, you could move your Graves out of jungle into your solo lane to get yourself a better jungle pick. Just like a really nice bit of flexibility there, but he's not particularly great individually in top lane. Okay, Illaoi. I can only put Illaoi in B. This champion has to be in B. She's very balanced from an individual power state, like stats. Like, if you just look at Illaoi as like a stat stick, she's really balanced. Okay, so why is Illaoi in B? Let's say the enemy team is playing a really high-range draft with Ezreal, with Hui, their top laner's also playing like Jayce. Illaoi is completely useless. She's like one of the worst champs you could ever pick in that game. Conversely, if they're all trying to dive onto your team, they're all melee range, they're playing like tank top, tank jungle, assassin mid, like an Akali or something, and they're playing like Kalista Nautilus bot or something like that. Illaoi is just an absolute demon. If they have to run into her, she's just one of the best champs in the entire game. So overall, she ends up in this B tier middle ground, where like sometimes she's incredible, sometimes she's completely useless. Individually, she's sort of balanced. There you go. She ends up in B tier. Irelia. Unfortunately, I have to put Irelia in C tier. She's very much like Fiddlesticks or Fiora. She's not good individually. She can't play a lot of lane matchups. She has very fringe counterpick potential where she can take over a game, but what she needs is so specific to be able to like play her. She needs a winning matchup, which is Gnar, Kennen, Jayce, or Aatrox. I think those are really the only ones. Gnar, Kennen, Jayce, Aatrox. Yeah, that's kind of it. She needs that, and she also needs the enemy team to not have things that fuck her over, like Alistar, or, you know, anything that can just knock her out of the fight or cancel her, like Poppy, right? Poppy can cancel her Q and then it goes on full cooldown and then she just can't play. So she needs the enemy team to not have that, and she also needs a winning matchup in top. Sometimes she can come in on R5 and completely dominate if the draft is perfect for her. That's why she has to go in C. But other than that, she's very fringe. I don't think I'm going to put Jarvan on the list. No, you know what? I will. I'll put Jarvan in C because of his buffs. Maybe in the perfect matchup, you can move your Jarvan out of jungle into top. Maybe. And I would pick him more than I would pick these three champions. However, I don't think he's particularly great. Also, based on what my S tier was on 14-17, I'm thinking that some of these A tier champs might move into S tier to create a new S tier. Because the champion that was in S tier, I think, is coming down somewhat. But we'll get there when we get there. We'll reevaluate A and S tier later. Jax. Jax is definitely A tier. If you haven't seen the buffs that Jax got, I had him in B tier before, but look at this, man. He's gaining 10 armor at all ranks on his ult. He's gaining 6 MR at all ranks on his ult. His on-hit magic damage is going up by 10 at all ranks, and the extra armor per champion hit is going up by 5 at all ranks. Jax is gaining so much. So yeah, he absolutely moves up from his previous point at B tier up to now A tier. Jax is looking so much better. Jayce. I think Jayce can go in A tier. I think he's a good mid-jungle flex. He really likes playing with a lot of the really good junglers at the minute. I think Jayce Lillia is incredible. And Lillia has been one of the best junglers over the course of the split. He just got some really nice utility buffs, as you can see here. His Q slows a bit more. This is kind of nice. His E gives more move speed. This is really nice. And he's been getting numbers buffs over the course of the season. Maybe for a couple of seasons, actually, he's been getting numbers buffs. And I just think he's in a really nice spot where he can also flex into mid. Oh, I actually didn't mention with Jax as well. Jax can also flex into jungle. He's not great at it, but it's there, right? Okay. Where are we? Kalista. Kalista is C tier, very, very niche. She can murder a lot of top lane matchups, like completely not allow them to play the game. And there is also the Kalista-Skarner pairing, which is top jungle, where it does two things. Skarner plays around Kalista really nicely. He can gank from creative angles. He can just sit around her. It wins pretty much all 2v2s. Yeah, pretty much all 2v2s in the game. Kalista Skarner will win. But then moving later into the game, it allows Skarner to look for creative ults that otherwise wouldn't do anything. But with Kalista, she pulls Skarner to her, and it pulls the enemy team into her team. It's a really nice engage. That's the only time I'd really play Kalista, but, you know, she has fringe pickability, so I'll put her in C. Karma top. I'm going to put this champ in B. This champ has been higher. Maybe I would go as far as to put it into A. Actually, yeah, because I'm going to do this A S rearrange. I'll put her in A for now, and we'll evaluate it later. But Karma is just incredibly flexible, can neutralize a lot of lanes, has really nice synergy with a lot of the junglers that are coming into the meta, which we'll talk about later. Now, it's not the Malignance version of Karma. I think she probably would go Malignance first item, but it's not full AP after that. It's just into Enchanter. Echoes of Helia is broken. Moonstone is broken. Dawncore rounds out her build really nicely in a solo lane. I do think she's playable in both solo lanes. Much better matchups in top lane, because she's like a ranged bully in top lane than mid lane. Also very, very good in support. Very flexible champ. Kind of like Gragas. Yeah, I think she's probably like, she's most similar to Gragas out of every champ in this, in like her place in the meta. So she should probably be in the same tier as him. Okay. Kayle, C tier. Like, again, maybe if you picked the perfect draft for Kayle, you could bring Kayle in where she has a playable lane and the enemy comp isn't going to do too much early and she's going to be able to come online, and then it's a comp where like they're reliant on blowing someone up, but then you have the Kayle ult. Also, there's combos like Kayle Hecarim, which is really nice, Kayle Udyr, where you can speed people up with the W. Kayle W is a very, very underrated spell. So there's spots for Kayle, but they're quite rare, so C tier. Kennen. Kennen, I think, is B tier. This champ's just really good in lane, and if it's like the right time for him, he can get like a nice engage off a lot of the time. That's what you're hoping for, right? Like a nice flank engage. The issue is he's countered by so much. So for example, one thing that the enemy top can do is just take the exhaust summon a spell instead of flash. Okay, a lot of champions can just do that. Let's say you're playing Kennen and the enemy's playing Ornn. Enemy Ornn can just go TP exhaust, and every time you try to engage, he just exhausts you. Kennen is hard countered by the exhaust summon spell. Another thing is that he's hard countered by a lot of champions in the game, right? Enemy team has Alistar. How do you play Kennen? Alistar just marks your engage and kicks you out when you try to go in. Enemy team has Tristana. Really hard to engage onto enemy team's Tristana because she just buster shots you away. Lots of things like that in the game that make his life really difficult. On a pure individual level, I do think he's quite strong. He's very strong in lane, wins a lot of lane matchups, but he's just not that useful in a lot of drafts. He's very, very difficult to pull off because there's so many things that block him. So he has to go in B tier rather than A, in my opinion. Right. Okay, Kled. I'll put Kled in C. Kled's role in the meta, aside from having great matchups into things like Aatrox, Kled's role in the meta is a pivot. What I mean by a pivot is that let's say you draft a comp that has very little engage, right? You're playing like a Swain comp or something, where you're expecting the enemy to run into you and you're going to control the space with your Swain ult. Then the enemy drafts something that you really need to engage on, and all of a sudden you don't really have any way to start a fight if you need to, right? Bam, Kled comes in. Kled ult, let's have a look at Kled ult. What Kled ult does, what people think it does, is just engage him. That's not the best thing about his ult. The best thing about his ult is... where is it? There you go. Allied champions following the draft gain Mr. Kled's Wild Ride, which is this. So up to 950 total movement speed, which is really crazy. So yeah, he can give your whole team 950 move speed. So you can basically pivot your comp from a disengaged comp into an engaged comp. And that's his role in the meta. It's very, very, very fringe, but sometimes you want it. So again, fringe goes in C. Xante A for sure. This champion, honestly, probably even... I might even just put this guy in S right now. He's the most blindable top laner in the game. He has very, very few bad matchups. As long as you draft around them, you pick him on like R4, and you ban out 2 bad matchups for him. Or, you know, you ban out bad matchups on B4, B5, and you use him as your blind going into R5. Xante is really strong in the meta. He's playable in pretty much every single draft. So flexible. Very individually strong. I think he's just incredible. And then obviously other things have been nerfed, which we'll get to later. Okay, Lee Sin going in C. Again, sometimes you could move your Lee Sin out of jungle and put him into top lane. This is the Ravenous Hydra 3.E into W max Lee Sin that people are playing. It's fine. Again, I wouldn't ever choose to play Lee Sin top, like on purpose. I would use this to get your Lee Sin out of jungle in case there's a better jungle champ you can pick that would win you the game. Okay. Lucian top goes in C. It's playable. It's a flex pick, flexible into mid and bot lane, but it's nowhere near as powerful as it has been in the past, and I wouldn't actively look to play it. Okay. Lillia top as well. I honestly think Lillia top belongs in B. The thing with Lillia top is that it's very much the same thing. You get your Lillia out of jungle. However, the amount of matchups she completely murders is really high. Like, every melee champ in the game is just losing to Lillia. Not every. Some of them, like Irelia, can actually get on her. But like, a lot of melee champs are actually losing to Lillia top. And her flex is being undervalued. Yeah, I know I can select top lane in here, but the thing is, if I do that, like, champions like Lillia would disappear. And then I wouldn't actually be looking at her and thinking about her. Because like here you see it's only traditional top laners showing up. So I'm just gonna go through and figure out who I want to put in here. But yeah, Lillia top, I think B tier. Lissandra top, I think this is C tier. Some matchups are very, very good if you play Lissandra top, and it's a flex with mid lane. She's quite strong. She just got nerfed quite substantially. But again, the damage on her Q is what got nerfed, and that's not really why you're playing Lissandra. But yeah, I think C tier just as like minor flex. Malphite. Malphite has to go in B tier for me. The reason I have to put him in B tier is very similar to the Illaoi, right? In the right game, he is the best champion in the game. In the wrong game, he is the worst champion in the game. Individually, he's pretty weak. He struggles with laning, but he has to go in B just because sometimes he is literally the best champion you can pick. If the enemy's full AD, if the enemy can't handle Malphite ult, that sort of thing. He's just an absolute monster. So, yeah. Malphite in B. How did I get onto M? I skipped over... One thing I wanted to talk about was Lulu. I think Lulu top has to be put in C tier with the buffs on this patch right here. Pix damage went up, and that is really good for Lulu top. Lulu top with on hit, I think has already been played in pro play actually. At some point, I can't remember who played it, but I'm sure somebody played it, and it does have to be considered. Okay, Maokai as well. Maokai top is not great, but again, if you flex him out of jungle to get yourself a better matchup, or flex him out of support to get yourself a better matchup or something like that, he can kind of hold his ground against a lot of things. Just fine. But yeah, he's not the best. Mordekaiser. Mordekaiser's better than ever. This is the best version of Mordekaiser we've seen since 2019. He's got buffed Rocket Belt to play with. Buffed Cosmic Drive is incredible on him. Rylai's is great. These are all items for when he needs to get closer to people, right? When he doesn't, when the enemy needs to run into him, this is the best time to pick Mordekaiser. When the enemy needs to run into him, he's got his Riftmaker, he's got his Liandry's. Also, Abyssal Mask is in a very, very good place. This is great for Mordekaiser. The itemization is great for Mordekaiser. The only thing with Mordekaiser is that in a lot of drafts he's unplayable. But in a lot of drafts he's really, really good. So, yeah, B tier. Mordekaiser historically has been like a C tier champion for me, but I've moved him up to B tier because of the itemization changes. Neferi, too flippy, too solo queuey. It flexes into mid. It's not great. Doesn't have the best matchups across the board. Oh, Mordekaiser flex. Yeah, I guess Mordekaiser jungle is also a thing. Is that enough for me to put him in A tier? No, I don't think so, because I don't think Mordekaiser jungle is great. I think Mordekaiser jungle is too bad to... it would be like a Mordekaiser mid. I would never play Mordekaiser mid. You're pretty much always going to be playing against a range champ as mid Mordekaiser, and then you're just yeah, you're suffering. Okay, Nasus. Nasus was A tier. Nasus was great. Nasus was so good. Unfortunately, they decided to completely kill Emax Nasus. Emax Nasus is gone. You now play 2 points E into Qmax. You just do that. That's what you do. You play 2 points E, 4 points Q, max W, finish off the Qmax, and then you max E. He scales a little bit worse because of the E damage nerfs, but that's negligible. But his lane phase is so much worse. The amount of matchups where you can pick him is so much lower. I think he has to drop down to B. Like, there's still a lot of matchups where he's playable, but now I think there's a lot of matchups that went from hard to genuinely unplayable. The reason it makes them unplayable is that he can no longer play out the bounce, because by nerfing his E, not only did they nerf the poke it does, they've removed his wave clear threshold, and there's no way to hit that anymore. So it was that with an adaptive shard and a dark seal, 3 points in E, you could drop your, after Doran's Ring start, you could drop your E on the wave and it would clear the backline, which would allow you to push out the wave, crash the wave, and get a reset in the early game. You can no longer do this, so you just get frozen on. And yeah, a lot of matchups will just kill you, or the jungle will come and gank you because you can't crash the wave. He's a lot weaker. Now, in the matchups where he's still playable, he's still an incredible champion. One of the best team fighting champs in the game. Massive armor shred, 50% armor shred on E when he's got it maxed out. It's going to be 35% for a lot of the time because he's going to be leaving it at 2 points. So that's another reason he's a bit weaker in team fights. But W is still one of the best spells in the entire game and a good counter to a lot of champions. Okay. Nautilus and Neeko, I think, can go top. Same for Nidalee, but I don't think you should. It's just like, maybe you could flex it. Nocturne. Nocturne, I am so sold on Nocturne top at this point. Also, flexibility into jungle. He has such good matchups in a lot of matchups. His itemization is amazing. Stride breaker into one more bruiser item into tank is great. He has unbelievable ability to impact the map. He can still play side lane later in the game. He's flexible into jungle, of course. I actually really like Nocturne top. The more I've been looking at it and the more I've been playing it, the more I've grown to like it. Olaf, I think Olaf is A tier as well. He's very, very slightly flexible into jungle, but that requires you to have something that facilitates him. Actually, maybe Olaf is B tier. Yeah, I think he's B tier. Yeah, I think it's fair to put Olaf in B tier because it's the Malphite Illaoi effect. In the right draft, he's a complete demon. In the wrong draft, he's completely useless. So yeah, B tier. Okay. Ornn, A tier. Easily blindable, playable into most matchups, has enough wave clear to bounce waves, scales like a demon, semi-flexible into jungle, semi-flexible into mid. Yeah, I think Ornn is just... Oh, also flexible with Senna Ornn. That's another thing. I think Ornn is great. Pantheon. I'm going to put Pantheon in B, just for flexibility. Just because he has insane flexibility. He's like a 4-roll flex. I don't think he's very individually good, though. And that's why I'm not placing him any higher, even though he is a 4-roll flex. I think he's just individually a bit weak at the minute. The itemization doesn't suit him as well as you would like. Yeah. I think Pantheon is like playable. He's flexible. There's a lot of spots for him. There's cool stuff you can do with like Pantheon Talia. You can go like Pantheon Talia 1-2, and then the Talia can go mid or it can go jungle, and the Pantheon can go in any of the 4 roles, and you can kind of switch it around. They have really nice synergy together, double global, going into fights and stuff. But yeah, I wouldn't pick it outside of that. Poppy, I think, goes in A tier. Great flex, really powerful jungle, really powerful support, really powerful top. Cock blocks a lot of drafts and has really good matchups into stuff like Camille, Cassante, Aatrox she's pretty good into. She can play into Gragas, she's great into Jax. So yeah, I do think Poppy, very good. Let's see. Quinn, literally just a Renekton counter pretty much. Like, there might be some other champions that you can counter with her, but I really wouldn't be picking her very often. But again, fringe pickability. Rammus, I think... no, honestly, I'm going to put this in D. Like, the thing with Rammus is that if the enemy is full AD, just pick Malphite. If they're full AD and Malphite's banned, just pick Cassante. If they're full AD and Malphite and Cassante are banned, just pick Ornn or Poppy and just build full armor. The thing with Rammus is that he just can't lane. Like, his pattern of laning is so difficult because his wave clear requires the minions to hit him, but they don't. They hit the enemy minion wave, which means he wants to like proxy, but that's very, very punishable in a coordinated environment. It's more of just a solo queue pick, honestly. I would just not play it. Renekton. I think Renekton goes in A tier. I think Renekton, on a pure individual strength basis, is insane. When he's played by the very, very top level top laners, I'm talking like Bin, Keen, 369, he will just sort of... He is part of what keeps all these other champions at bay. You have to be able to lane into Renekton to be able to be a good champion. He will just create a lane lead, and he scales much better than he used to because of his changes that have happened to his R across the course of the game. His strongest point in the game, honestly, now is probably level 11. He's an absolute monster at level 11. Itemization's great for him. He's got like Eclipse, Cleaver, Sterak's. This 3-core is amazing for him. So yeah, I think Renekton is a lot stronger than he has been in the past. Into a lot of matchups as well. He can also go for Profane Hydra if he needs more burst. And then into champions like Mundo. I saw a Renekton versus Mundo at one point in a pro play game, and I was so baffled that the Renekton didn't Blade of the Ruined King, because you would just murder him. Like, he just stacks pure HP. Just go balk and slap him. But hey, there we go. Rengar, there's some fringe Rengar angles with Ivern being so strong in the meta. He does need a playable lane. No, honestly, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna put Rengar in B because of how powerful Ivern is in the meta. Rengar Ivern is like disgracefully good, but Rengar is also just like this is a bruiser Rengar, right? Not an assassin Rengar. He's honestly just way better than people give him credit for. Ravenous Hydra into bruiser build, really good. There's stuff like Unending Despair in the game. There's Spirit Visage, all these sorts of things. When he's played with Ivern, can turn him into an absolute demon. But also, I think he can just be picked in a lot of matchups to punish them. And then even without Ivern, you just have Bruiser Rengar. The only thing that can really go downhill for Bruiser Rengar is like if you have a good matchup for Bruiser Rengar, is that it becomes Infernal Map, which is a 1 out of 6 chance. If that does happen, he feels really sad because he ends up losing the ability to jump in a lot of team fights because the bushes disappear. But conversely, if you get Ocean Map, awesome. But yeah, he's just a really good frontline. Riven C, fringe counterpick to stuff like Gwen and Camille. Also Aatrox. But what you need is a playable matchup, and you need physical damage engage, and you need the enemy team to not have any things that can block her, like Alistar, Poppy, Lulu, these sorts of things. Really, really, it's very much like the Irelia thing, right? She could come in on R5 as the best champion in that spot, but it's so fringe that it's unlikely. Rumble. Rumble's been hit again. I think Rumble was S. Then he got nerfed a couple of times and he moved down to A. Now he's been nerfed again and he moves down to B. He is still very flexible, can be played in a lot of drafts. If you can get past the early nerfs, then he just becomes where he was last patch anyway. In team fights, he can still be a monster. A lot of drafts really struggle with his ult, but he's much weaker than he used to be. He was like very solidly A tier, and now I think he's just B tier for me. Sejuani, I think Sejuani should be a B tier top laner. She's playable in a lot of matchups and she's flexible into jungle. She's way better than people give her credit for. If you actually go and play Sejuani top, you'll notice that a lot of matchups she actually bullies quite hard. She has very, very deceiving burst. In a lot of matchups she can play TP Ignite and just one-shot people. So yes, that's Sejuani. Set, I think Set has some really, really nice spots, but I think... Actually, yeah, I'm going to put Set B. The reason I'm going to put Set B is that he would have been C, but ever since this Overlord's Bloodmail item came into the game, he's actually kind of scary later in the game. He used to be more like early skewed, but now the later the game goes, he actually does get quite scary, and if he's picked into drafts where the enemy has good frontline, he can deny engages while threatening the backline. So that's quite nice for Set. And he has quite a lot of good matchups in top lane as well. Rise, this is a C tier. It's a fringe counter pick. That's basically the way I've been rating it. It has flexibility into mid lane, of course, but that's about it. Shen. I think Shen can go in B. I think he can be played in a lot of drafts. As long as he can get through lane and he's not playing against something that's going to take the entire map. He's also flexible into jungle, but he wins a lot of lane matchups that you wouldn't expect him to. He did also just get buffed. He got extra passive shield this patch, so that's nice for him. Yeah, I think Shen deserves B. Shyvana is D. This champion is something that people have been trying to play in top lane, but honestly, it's too weak in lane. The lane phase is just too weak for it to be playable. I don't think there's ever a draft where I'd put my Shyvana in top. Sion is C. This champion is just way better in mid lane. You can see that the Baus is not playing Sion in top lane, and the reason is that he just gets shit on in so many matchups that it's way too difficult for him to actually play the game. So yeah, I think he has to go in C tier. Okay, Skarner I think is an A tier top laner. Unfortunately, his skill expression is lower than it used to be. There's no more wall clip combo. There's no more like backwards E combo. There's no more any of this. He's just been buffed stat-wise. So he's just more of a stat stick now. If the enemy team needs to run into you, he's great. He's amazing at denying engages and buying space. He's very good in tank v tanks. And he's very good at controlling people. He has some fringe engage potential as well, but it's harder to play engage with Skarner than it is to play disengage. That said, flex pick into jungle as well, performing very well in jungle too. So yeah, A tier champion for Skarner. Singed. Would I ever pick Singed? Maybe. Maybe if Singed W is like the best spell in that game, then I would pick Singed. But again, he really needs... It's basically based on his W, right? He has really strong level 1. After that, he kind of loses lane to most champions. He can proxy and be annoying, but that's less viable and competitive than it is in solo queue. You're probably going to be playing a more traditional lane, but if your matchup's good and your W's are like in a, any spot where you might pick Poppy, for example. Also, slight flexibility into support if the enemy is playing Yuumi, but that's like so niche. It's just a Yuumi counter. But Lehens would for sure pick it if the enemy blind picked Yuumi. But they're not going to be doing that. Smolder. This champion's knocked down a peg. This champ was really, really good before. Like, crazy good in top lane. Would just counter a lot of champions and scale like a demon. Still does that, but way weaker. Lower health, so he's more vulnerable. Lower damage in lane, so he has less threat. He also has lower wave clear because they nerfed his W and his Q, so he can reset his waves and recall less reliably. It's just less reliable. He is still a triple flex, and he is still really good in top lane sometimes, but other times he's just like not playable in top lane now. So I think B tier is fair for him now. Maybe bottom of A because of like flexibility into 2 roles, but I think he's more like top of B than bottom of A now. Let's see. Swain? I think Swain is like sometimes pickable. If you need magic damage. He's like Swain and Ryze to me. Maybe Ryze goes higher actually. I think Ryze might go higher. This champ does win lane into a lot of things. The way I'm thinking of it is that Gwen, in the drafts where you want Gwen, if you don't have Gwen, you could pick Ryze. And if you don't have Ryze, you could pick Swain. You know, like if they're banned. They want to be played in pretty much the same drafts, like where the enemy is heavy melee, so they can get a lot of value out of their kits. And I would put them as like Swain is the C tier version of that, Ryze is the B tier version of that, and Gwen is the A tier version. And they all have minor flex into other roles as well. Silas, this is a Malphite counter. It goes in C, like sometimes it's pickable. Tahm Kench, you can sometimes flex your Tahm Kench into top if it gets a good matchup. He's very good in tank v tank. He's very good when picked into champions like Vi. He can just bring that snap, I save my AD carry button. But other than that, he's not a great champion, but he's some fringe pickability. Teemo, this champion is way too reliant on the chaotic environment of solo queue. He doesn't actually win many lanes that hard, not as hard as he used to. The fleet nerf detriments him as well for ranged champions. A lot of the time he was wanting to take fleet. And his entire champion is just countered by swapping your ward trinket to the sweeper trinket, which people don't do in solo queue but would in competitive. So yeah, that's that. Was Tristana changed this patch? Nope. Okay. Tristana, same as before then. I think C tier. Like sometimes you can put her in top. She's a really good answer to Kennen. Kind of like the Corki thing used to be, but she didn't get nerfed, so you know she's still there. Trundle. I think this is also a niche counter pick with like minor flexibility into jungle. I think Trundle is just like very niche top lane. It's good into like Sejuani. It can be good into some tank matchups. It's kind of good into Olaf. They're kind of like the Trundle spots. Tryndamere. This champion is unfortunately not good enough individually. Like, he's a champion that is so based on his individual power, and it's not there at the minute. If you remember the worlds where it was there, then Tryndamere was incredible in mid and top. He was like a flex pick for mid top, and he was individually broken, and that's great for him. Right now, he's not individually that powerful, so yeah, I don't think he's great. Twisted Fate. Honestly, Twisted Fate for me is an A tier champ. This champ is so flexible. He can be played in most drafts. He has great matchups into a lot of top laners. There are things that beat him in lane, but what he can do when played by someone like Keane, I think to be convinced by Twisted Fate top, because a lot of people watched Zeus and weren't convinced by Twisted Fate top, watch Keane play that champ. Also, APTF got buffed for mid. ADTF is still viable mid. He's very flexible in what he can do, and in top lane he just like wins and gets prio into a lot of champs and is so useful. So yeah, I think A tier champ for TF. I'm sad that people stopped playing him as much. I think Zeus was a big factor for this, because Zeus just kept losing on it, and like people were like, "Ah, this champ's so shit." That was like the community reaction, but honestly, you watch Keane play this champ and the things that it does with his... Like, Keane just has incredible macro sense, and what he does with this champ is crazy. Udyr. A tier. Udyr is so good into a lot of these melee tops. Udyr is so good. He's very similar to Gwen, right? He's AP, and he wants to be picked in games where the whole enemy team is in melee range of him. He's also very, very flexible into jungle. Udyr jungle is very good. I think Udyr is very good and should be being picked. Urgot, I think Urgot is solid B. He's just decent. He's never really awful in any draft. He's never really incredible in any draft. He does like being played in drafts where the enemies are running into him. He scales really well. He has a nice follow-up to engages. I think he's just solid. Just a solid B tier. He's just like decent. Varus. Okay, Varus was my only S tier champion last patch. He got nerfed. He got like decently nerfed. I still think he's S tier though. But Varus top is completely broken. Like, it's just disgusting. Vayne top, I think, is B. A lot of matchups, Vayne can just come in and completely murder, and that's why she goes in B tier. She's not blindable by any means, but she's a very, very good counter pick. Kind of like Smolder, but with more upside in top lane, less flexibility than Smolder. But she can just come into like the Darius matchup, or the Udyr matchup, or the Olaf matchup, or the Cassante matchup, and just not allow the Garen matchup, Illaoi matchup, Mordekaiser matchup. All of these champs cannot play the game into Vayne. Like, it's just unplayable. Even Urgot, which I just talked about, right? She just murders him. So yeah, really nice counter pick. A less fringe counter pick than the C tier fringe counter picks. She's just a good counter pick. So yeah, B tier. But like most of the time, Vayne top's going to be bad. It's just in those spots she's amazing. Okay. Victor. I think there's room for Victor top, but it's very fringe. But you can flex your Victor out of mid. You can play a more Q-Max focused Victor. I do think there's room for it. It's not great though. Vladimir. I genuinely think Vlad is fundamentally broken. Wait, did the nerfs come through on this patch? No, their next patch. Yeah. No, Vlad is fundamentally broken. This is a scaling champion that can get through every lane. Because of the new W max thing. So in his good lanes, he will max Q and he will bully you. In his bad lanes, he will max W and you can't bully him. He will scale into a demon and he will build Cosmic Drive, which helps him close the gap. In like traditionally, he struggles with not with closing the gap, right? But he can do the same thing Mordekaiser can do. He can even go Rocket Belt if he needs to. Rocket Belt, Cosmic Drive, Death Cap. He can do so much now, and he's so hard to punish. I think Vlad in top lane is fundamentally broken. So yeah, the champion goes S tier for me. Volibear, I think, is B tier. He would be C tier if it wasn't for how flexible he is in build. He can go tank, he can go bruiser, he can go AP, he can go Rod of Ages into Navori with the Jack of all trades thing. There's a lot Volibear can do, and he's also flexible into jungle. So yeah, individually I think he's more powerful than he has been in the past, so he goes B tier. Warwick, D tier. Very, very similar to Briar. Cheese pick, just relies on solo queue environment where people don't respect his roams. If he doesn't get ahead before level 9, he just loses the game. Like, if you contain him and just don't let him get ahead, he just loses. Yeah, I really think Warwick top is a complete solo queue thing. Warwick jungle is also very bad in competitive, so his flexibility is just not there. Not a fan of Warwick at all. Wukong, though, I think, honestly, I might even put Wukong in B. I think this champ is way better than people are giving him credit for. In any draft where you need an engaged physical damage top, I think don't sleep on Wukong. As well as his flexibility into jungle. But like this champ with Grasp Q, with like Sundered Sky, he honestly, his top lane matchups are really good. A lot of them he can 100-0 all in as well. So yeah, keep an eye out for Wukong top. Let's see. Yasuo. I'm playing Yasuo in A. Yasuo's in A for how good he is in the draft. He can be played in 3 roles. Very flexible, pairs very nicely with a lot of things in the current meta. Counters a lot of things in the current meta. For example, Yasuo is the best matchup into Varus. Windwall has so much value, and this version, like in the current meta, Windwall has incredible value, and this version of Yasuo has way more Windwalls than any other version of Yasuo ever, because his second item is Navori, which he was never able to do before, but now he can. So yeah, I do think Yasuo is very strong. Yone as well, A. This is more for his individual power. Now, of course, you do have to be very proficient at Yone, but we just saw what Zeus can do, right, in the LCK Gauntlet finals. But Yone, just very individually powerful and can also flex into mid, where he's also very good. Also, the fleet buffs for melee champions are bonuses to both Yasuo and Yone, though a lot of the time Yasuo is going to be taking Grasp. Yone does take fleet. Sometimes he takes Conqueror, sometimes he might also take Grasp. Yasuo, I think, solidly takes Grasp in top lane. But yeah. That's the way. Okay, Zac. This champion is disgusting. S tier. He is the best engaged champ in the game by a mile. If you want a disengaged tank, Cassante. If you want an engaged tank, Zac. Perfect. Just make sure the enemy doesn't have Poppy and you're absolutely chilling. But even if they have Poppy, Janna, Alistar, these champs that you think Zac shouldn't be played into, buy Zhonya's on Zac. Right? You E in, and while you're in the air, you Zhonya's. Okay? It's a great item on him anyway. It's an armor item with AP. He loves that shit. He eats that shit up. Your E still lands. It goes through the Janna Tornado or the Janna Roll or the Alistar Q or the Poppy W. It just goes through it. You just E in, Zhonya's, bam. Then you're in the middle of their team. Oh, bam. This champ does a disgusting amount of damage. He wins like 90% of top lane matchups because he's just overtuned. He just one-shots you, can never die, manaless, takes plates. Can go full tank, can go AP, can flex into jungle, can flex into mid. I think Zac's one of the best champions in the entire game. Don't sleep on that champ. Yorick, C tier. Fringe counter pick, not great overall. Really good if you need terrain creation against things like Olaf. That's kind of his niche. Zeri. I think Zeri goes with Vayne. Despite slight nerfs on this patch, she's still an incredible flex in mid and bot. And yeah, I think maybe I had her in A before, and I've turned her down to B because of the slight nerfs. I can't actually remember, but I do think she belongs in B. She's very good into a lot of champs. But a lot of these AD carries that have been played in solo lanes have been nerfed, which is good. I'm very glad about that. And finally, I will talk about Zilean. I think Zilean in top lane can get through a lot of lanes for free. If you need like a scaling enabler for something like a Hecarim or an Olaf or an Udyr, Zilean can be good. Top is Zilean's best solo lane. It's better than mid Zilean. The reason is because a lot of the time you're playing against a melee champion. He can just wave clear, but he can also drop his Q on the minions your enemy is trying to last hit, and then they have to choose, do I last hit this minion and take the damage, or do I just give it? I do think top is Zilean's best solo lane. Support obviously is his best role, but yeah, there's fringe pickability for Zilean. In top lane. Oh, that took some time. Okay, let's reevaluate A tier, and then the top lane tier list will be done. And I will probably do jungle tier list another day, because we're going to be going into UDKI. That's my drafting tournament. As long as Foz is around, I think that's probably the plan for now. And then maybe I'll do jungle after that, or maybe I'll do jungle tomorrow. We will see. But let's finish off this top lane. So Aatrox, I think definitely A. Yeah, A. A. Do any of these move into S? Or is this like a nice A tier? No, I think this is actually correct for A tier. Yeah, I think I'm happy with this tier list, the way it's ended up. Just trying to see if I would move anything at all. Like, the closest I am to moving anything would probably be Mordekaiser into A tier. But again, I don't think I'm too convinced by it. I think I'm happy with this B tier. Everything I put in C is either very fringe or very weak. Everything I put in D I would never play in top lane, but people do, so that's why I put it there. And I don't think I missed any champions for top lane. Yeah, I think we're good. I think we're good. So, here is the 14-18 top lane tier list. Going into Worlds. Now, of course, this tier list is for competitive play. This is not for solo queue. This is for the World Championship. This is for, even if you just play in an amateur team, right? It's specifically tailored for competitive play. So what I'm going to